The Outsiders is the kind of episode that good series need to cool off the audience before the big finale and plant the seeds for future storylines. It also introduces a major player in the city of Dallas. The Ewings are a bit on edge since Lucy called off the engagement to Kit Mainwaring. The breakup cost JR the oil refinery he's been pining for. Jock, of course, sides with JR, but Ellie smacks him down and tells all of them she doesn't want to hear any more about it.
She had her reasons, Jock. Now it's over and done with. JR don't want any more talk about the Mainwarings.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
Bobby, who can't stand to see anyone sad for even a second, buys Lucy
A new car!
The fact that JR offered to buy her a car and then reneged when he didn't get his oil refinery is just peak John Ross. On the other hand, the Triumph TR7 doesn't have the wood paneling, so she probably lucked out. Elsewhere, Cliff Barnes is putting the screws to Ewing Oil by delaying approval of exploratory drilling. That forces JR to lay off his crew so they can find work elsewhere.
That's a good crew, Mr. Ewing. They'll be hard to replace.
I know it. So does Barnes, JR.
Jock says it's time to put in a call to Sam Culver, the former governor and Speaker of the House who still holds a lot of clout in the Lone Star State. Ray Krebbs, who is just now getting over Garnet McGee, goes out for a drink at the local honky-tonk. There he meets Donna Culver, who is a classy fish out of water in this dive. One of the men in her party tries to drag her out of the bar, but Ray intervenes and saves the man from a beatdown at the hands of some good old boys. Donna and Ray get on so well that they close the place down, and Donna makes a date for him the following night. The next morning, Jock and JR meet with Sam Culver, the elder statesman of Texas, and his young wife, Donna. Sam is already way out in front, figuring the Ewings want him to do something about Cliff Barnes.
Yeah, some things never change, Jock. Like the Ewings and the Barneses.
Sam is polite but gives them the runaround, saying that he's heard people are pretty happy with how the oil company's been reined in. JR points out that reining in the oil companies just means that we're dependent on foreign oil. Or as he says, the Arabs. JR also disinvites Sue Ellen from dinner so she doesn't embarrass him, but that's okay because she's drinking her dinner. Meanwhile, Donna and Ray meet up again. Donna orders a white wine, the signature alcohol of all Western saloons. Donna tells Ray she appreciates that he didn't hit on her the night before, and they talk about the prospect of falling in love.
To fun.
Yeah, I could use a lot of that.
Miss Ellie learns about Sam's wife and asks if Jock is jealous of his contemporary marrying a woman Bobby's age. He tells her that no one compares to her. Aww. Pamby are about to head out for tennis when Ray stops by and invites them out for a drink with him and his new lady. Yeah, that's gonna go well. Sam and Donna come to South Fork for dinner. Donna tells Bobby and Pam she dropped out of college and then met Sam. Sam tells JR that he depends on Donna for counsel, like a partner. And he's still on the fence waiting for the wind to blow, much like Aaron Burr. Sue Ellen takes note of Sam and Donna's relationship as it spotlights how little JR thinks of her and her opinions. The next morning, all the girls are sick of hearing Lucy whine around about Kit Mainwaring, so one of her friends gives her an upper. Bobby and Pam show up at the Longhorn to meet Ray and his new girl, but when they see that it's Donna Culver, they sneak out before they're spotted. Bobby thinks Ray must not know who she is, so he calls Donna to have a chat with her. That's pretty smooth, Robert. Marilee Stone asks Miss Ellie to depose Sue Ellen as the head of the Daughters of the Alamo, until she's feeling better. It's clear at this point that everyone knows Sue Ellen is an alcoholic.
She's hoping that the ladies will let her resign.
Well, that would be an enormous relief if I could resign.
Bobby confronts Donna about seeing Ray. She explains complex feelings for Sam and Ray, but she probably could have just had him watch Casablanca, because Sam is clearly the Victor Laszlo of this story.
It's about a girl who had just come to Paris from her home in Oslo. At the house of some friends, she met a man about whom she had heard her whole life. A very great and courageous man. He opened up for her a whole beautiful world full of knowledge and thoughts and ideals. Everything she knew or ever became was because of him. And she looked up to him and worshipped him with a feeling she supposed was love.
After overhearing Bobby mention Donna and Ray in the same sentence, JR stalks Ray and confirms Ray and Donna are sleeping together. Thinking he has a wrench to throw in the works now, JR blackmails Donna into advising Sam into defanging the OLM. Lucy's friends give her more drugs and promise they can hook her up with some cute guys from Plano. Well, you know what they say about those guys from Plano? They, can't stop talking about Frito-Lay corporate headquarters? Donna breaks things off with Ray, but she lets him know that what they had was real.
No, you see, Victor Laszlo is my husband. And was, even when I knew you in Paris.
Donna says that she's also leaving Sam Culver, but she's not ready to be with anyone in these confusing times. And if she stays, she'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of her life. The next morning, Sam calls JR and tells him that Cliff Barnes has his full support. JR offers to meet with him in person with some information that could change his mind, but Sam implies that Donna's already told him about Ray Krebbs. And JR's losing streak continues. The Outsiders is a fine episode on its own, giving Ray Krebbs something to do beside be the sad sack pinball for Lucy and JR to bat around. Up until now, it's been difficult to generate any interest in Ray as a character. I'm not going to say that all changes with the introduction of Donna Culver, but at least he has some kind of story arc that doesn't involve being a Ewing victim. Despite the running joke that Donna is so young, her actress Susan Howard was winding down her acting career when Dallas came along. Like most of the cast, she had bounced around TV and film before being cast as the lovelorn Donna Culver. She even had a few guest appearances with Larry Hagman on I Dream of Jeannie. I do appreciate that Donna is smart enough and strong enough to go head-to-head with JR in a way that few women were allowed to do at this point. Howard plays her with a touch of class that was sorely needed. Long-time character actor John McIntire plays Donna's husband Sam. Again, McIntyre's career stretches all the way back to the 40s and the usual gaggle of TV appearances. His most visible role is undoubtedly Sheriff Chambers in the Alfred Hitchcock classic Psycho.
Arbogast.
If you've seen the show before, you know that this episode led to a number of different story threads. Lucy's drug problem begins here. The Ewing's awareness of Sue Ellen's drinking comes to the surface here. Donna and Ray's romance starts here. It's also a good episode on its own, though, with JR being thwarted not because someone was richer or more powerful, but because they were simply more moral and honest.
There's nothing you can tell me Donna hasn't.
And with that, we are nearly at the end of the second season tether, where JR's losing streak could potentially cost him everything.